Welcome everyone to CSDR. It's a pleasure to host this small conference. I am not Uttara or I am not Fawaz. My name is Gaurav. I work here at CSDR. CSDR is fairly a new organization. We're about 4.5 years old, and we work on various issues of defense security. And one of our programs that looks at technology in society. So this event is happening under that. Most of the people who work at CSDR essentially look at AI, and when they look at AI and new technology, they look at it from the angle of geopolitics of technology, security, defense, etc. But since we've had Nihal with us, our focus has also been on the intersection of new technologies and how they impact society. So a couple of months back, when Nihal told me that he wanted to do this event, and we were also told that the dialogue and Kazim were on board, we were very excited the prospect of this. So on behalf of everybody at CSDR, Dr. Happy Mon Jacob, Lieutenant D.S. Huda, both founders of this place, I welcome you all. I think from my own perspective, why I thought this was an important event, and this is something that I've been discussing with Nihal, is that at the root of the entire democratic process lies the idea of a promise that a leader makes to the electorate, saying that I will give you this if you put your faith in me. And I think we've seen and we know enough how that promise is, it has always been a little dubious in many ways. And since the politicians are not yet here, perhaps I can say that. Or if they are here, I'm sorry. But technologies such as AI and just internet in general have sort of impacted how that promise is made and how it's tested and how it's delivered. So I think in the successive elections that we've had in India, we've also seen how almost in the absence of at least much regulation, there's a lot of talk around it, how there has been an uptake of these new technologies, especially AI, in sort of deepening some of the existing problems we were seeing, whether it's disinformation, right? So therefore, from that angle, to the promise of democracy, what impact do these new technologies have? And we have 3 panels today, and Nihal will speak about them later. But as I said earlier, we're really excited about this event, and I'm sure more people will be joining. Nihal has been working very hard along with our sort of colleagues at the dialogue. So more people will join, and I wish all of you great discussions throughout the day. Over to Shruti from the dialogue.
Thanks, Gaurav.
Thank you, Gaurav, for setting the context so well. Hi everyone, I am Shruti Shreya. I am a Senior Program Manager for Platform Regulation at the Dialogue. The Dialogue, as some of you might know, is a tech policy think tank based out of New Delhi. And our focus area is anything and everything under the realm of technology and its intersection with society. So we work across different domains in the technology sphere, including platform regulation online, which includes content regulation in the online sphere, digital safety issues. We also work on data privacy, data protection, and new emerging technologies, including AI, which has really set many new questions and which has led to many new discussions with respect to how technology impacts and influences the social sphere. So first of all, thank you so much to CSDR for this collaboration and for hosting this event today. It's a pleasure to collaborate with all of you, and also to Nihal for facilitating this collaboration between the 2 organizations. And Kazim could not be here because of some personal health reasons, but on his behalf, I would like to give a hearty welcome to all of you. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I hope that you all find the conversation to be fruitful. Please engage, ask questions, and let us know, do give us feedback as well, because we want to keep the momentum of these conversations going, and we plan to do more such discussions in the near future. In terms of the topic, I know Gaurav has given the context very well, but I would just like to add with the fact that yes, when it comes to democracy especially, like it's very important that the elections, the entire process of electing the leaders is as free, fair and unbiased as possible to ensure that the fundamental ethos of democracy is protected. And when it comes to the world's largest democracy, India, the challenge is even more immersive and it's even more gigantic, so to say. Now, technology has led to concerns such as disinformation, deepfakes, some of the things which would be discussed at length during the panels today. They are impacting how voters' perceptions take place and the entire process of an informed electorate. However, this same technology, if put to use in a meaningful way and in a proportionate way with the right kind of checks and balances, it can also help in enhancing the efficiency of electoral processes. It can help in greater engagement with the voters, and it can also help in building more accountability and transparency, all of which is very important for democracy. So while we will be discussing about the challenges, I think it will also be important to discuss that in addition to mitigating these challenges, how we can ensure the technology can be used for the good that it has in itself. So thanks again to all of you, and looking forward to the panels today. Would request Nihal to come forward and lead the conversation ahead.
Thanks so much for that informative summary of the panel. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Nihal Krishnan here. So I sort of wear a few, juggle a few funny hats. So I am a visiting scholar with CSDR and the emerging tech policy team. I'm a journalist with the Hindu. My colleague Arundeep is with us here today. And so yeah, I've been reporting on all things at the nexus of tech and politics, data privacy, AI, cybersecurity, misinformation, disinformation in Delhi for the past 9 months. And then I'm also a fellow with the Council on Foreign Relations in New York. I'm a journalist by training. I spent the past decade in Washington, D.C. covering tech and politics over there with Mother Jones, the Washington Examiner, FedScoop and Cyberscoop, amongst others. But yeah, I've been here in Delhi for the past 9 months, and trying to bring attention to issues mostly focused on online speech issues like misinformation, disinformation, content moderation, censorship, and then mostly through reporting in the Hindu and some research with CSDR, and now increasingly with the dialogue as well. But so basically, the brainchild for Electech is the fact that, I've been covering AI quite closely for the past few years, and, a number of elections in the US. This is my first election in India. And it just seems like India is the wild, wild west when it comes to use of AI in politics. Like, there's no other major country in the world where you see AI being used, deployed amongst like hundreds of millions of people. So I think it's truly sort of both an incredibly exciting and terrifying time, because the US and most European countries have taken a slow approach, or they already have a bunch of rules and regulations. India either doesn't have many rules and regulations on how AI is to be used in politics, or the few that are there have not really been applied. And so to me, it's just like we are the guinea pigs. We are that experiment, and everyone will learn from how India's response to AI has been in this general election and the state elections to come. And so to me, there's sort of it's such an experiment, and I think that there's a lot of great innovative uses, but there's also some very scary uses to AI, and I think that's what sort of captured my imagination, and Azim and Shruti from the dialogue, and Sagar, who was our third partner. And so, there's just not many conversations happening right now on how AI is being used in politics. We've seen some media coverage, but not a sort of sustained high level series of conversations, and we just felt like there was a gap here, and so we wanted to fill that gap. And a lot of the heavy lifting has been done by the dialogue, by Kazim, by Shruti, by Pranav, by Garima. Very grateful that they are the subject matter experts. They actually do the hard work of doing the research and writing, and know a lot of the speakers here. So big thanks to them for the lift, and to my colleagues Devika and Gaurav at CSDR for institutional support. But it's I just think this is like a dynamic, exciting subject, and there's a handful of experts. We try to accumulate as many of them as we can. And so just a quick rundown of the key themes for today. We have a panel. The first panel is going to be on AI deepfakes, the viral monster that mostly kept quiet during the elections. It's sort of a little bit of a counterintuitive, unexpected phenomenon that we've observed and has not gotten a lot of attention. Deepfakes didn't actually unravel our democracy the way that many, including the media, had warned us. We have the second panel on AI and content moderation for informed democracy. So the challenges that content moderation has, and how AI can be used to both help content moderation, but also to send it astray in crazy ways, and how Indian languages, major Indian languages, LLMs and AI tools are not trained in most Indian languages, so it poses a particular challenge in, largest country in the world. And then the third panel is how AI was used in the Indian elections in 2024 and looking to the future in state elections and others. And we'll have some members of parliament and others for that. So anyway, those are that's sort of a brief rundown of this. As Shruti kindly said, I hope everyone comes is bursting with questions. We'll have time for questions at the end of every panel, and and please continue the con. You know how to find all of us online, the dialogue, CSDR, and each of our speakers and panelists. So feel free to continue it there. And looking forward to a juicy set of conversations. I'll now kick things off to Pranav, my dear colleague from the dialogue, for our first panel on AI and deepfakes.
Thank you, Nihal.
Also, people can join in on the main guests. Please feel free to come.
Great. Thank you, Gaurav, Shruti, Nihal, for that context setting and the opening remarks. That was quite helpful. Good evening, everyone. I'm Pranav from the Dialogue team. I oversee the work on platform regulation and internet tech at the Dialogue. And it's so nice to have you all here. And my heartfelt gratitude to CSTR for collaborating with the Dialogue to host this for a round of sessions. The first one being on AI-enabled deepfakes. And when I look back, there was a lot of furrow this year that the world is going on elections. Most of the countries, at least in terms of population, the majority of the world was going to elections. And there was a lot of furrow that this will impact, specifically deepfakes will impact the results thereof. And we did have certain aberrations like Slovakia, where there were scenarios where a leading leader was a deepfake of, I think it was a voice-based deepfake, wherein it was alleged that they are planning to rig the election with another media professional, and that did skew to some amount the election results. But we didn't see much of that in India, which brings us to the theme today, the viral monster that mostly kept quiet during the general elections in India. If we go back a little, if I go back to 2014, that's when social media kicked in. And it helped many to reach the audiences, but it was still at a nascent stage. There wasn't enough digital literacy and access. So it was a good time to utilize social media to reach to the electorate, but not the way in which we saw it in 2019. The 2019 elections, social media was weaponized for the first time, and people could reach, and not only there was political advertisements, but there were groups created so that misinformation, disinformation could be peddled. And the 2024 we saw the version where we also have deepfakes, AI-enabled misinformation. And it is in this context that we want to start the discussion today, that how things are moving and what impact it had in India. What are some of the best practices that need to keep in mind? Because while there was not much impact on the election itself, there were some concerns raised on the trust that the electorate has on what they see on social media or in the internet generally as well. So with this, today we'll be exploring the nuances of deepfakes and how AI is used in the election and what lies ahead for us. And we'll have around 45 minutes to discuss that, followed by Q&A. So please keep your questions ready. We'll be happy to have them in the end. And with us, we have Kritika Goel. She's the head of editorial operations at Logically Facts, and she leads a team of over 20 multilingual fact checkers who work towards mitigating the harm associated with online misinformation and disinformation. We have Fawaz. Fawaz is a project leader at CCG, Center for Corporate Governance at New Delhi, and has a background in human rights and law. Thank you, Fawaz. We have Ms. Mirchandani. Maya is an award-winning journalist and head of media studies at Ashoka University. Thank you for joining, Maya. We have Uttara. Uttara is the head of public policy at Snap and has been working in this domain for over 13 years. Thank you for joining us. And we have Pamposh. Pamposh is an experienced journalist and leads the Deepfakes Analysis Unit, an initiative to combat AI-generated misinformation at the Misinformation Combat Alliance. Thank you for all of you for joining us today. And with this, we would first like to kickstart the discussion by understanding what deepfakes are. When we break the words, we understand deep technology, that is AI-related technology, and fakes, which brings in the intent with which the media is created. It does need to be segregated from synthetic media the way I approach it. Many people have a different approach towards it. Synthetic media is where you are using artificial intelligence or any other technology to create synthetic media, but there is no malicious intent aligned with it. For example, we did see some years back a Cadbury advertisement where Shah Rukh Khan, you could just like pose with them, or another advertisement where your small business could be endorsed by an actor. So now that's a positive use case of synthetic media. So not all use cases of AI-enabled synthetic media are negative, which is where we want to distinguish it with deepfakes, where there is malicious intent involved. And there are many other versions like cheapfakes, and this is where I would like to get Pamposh in, that what role did AI enable? Firstly, what is deepfake and its different avatars, and what role did AI-generated content play in the sense of misinformation campaigns during the 2024 election? Were deepfakes a prominent tool, or was its influence overstated generally?
Thank you for your question, and I just want to thank the CSDR and Dialogue for this conversation. You started the conversation in a very interesting mood. I have my colleagues sitting there, and they were smiling when you talked about labeling. You essentially started with labeling of content and why something should be called synthetic as opposed to deepfakes. So at the Deepfakes Analysis Unit, we also try to do something of an academic exercise. Now, for those of you who don't know what the DAU or the Deepfakes Analysis Unit is, we are essentially a resource for the public. We are set up under the Misinformation Combat Alliance, and my colleague Kritika here, Logically Facts, is part of the MCA, and it's a collaborative project. And I also see Abhilash there from the Quint, so it's a collaborative project led by fact checkers. So without taking much time, I'll just walk you through what we typically do. So there's a tip line number whereby any member of the public can escalate an audio or video to us if they suspect that it's being generated by AI in part or fully, and we don't focus on images because we feel that resource already exists within the fact-checking ecosystem in India. And we also specifically work with fact checkers. We have a separate channel with them in case they come across something that they suspect has an element of AI and essentially is harmful and misleading. So they escalate it to us. We have internal tools that we work with through our partnerships, and we also have a bunch of experts who we reach out to every so often whenever after the initial triaging, when we find that something is suspected to be AI generated misinformation. So with that, the way we look at deepfakes, and the first thing that we at the DAU would say is that what is the intent? It's always a difficult question. Is it negative? Is it malicious? So for us, the moment we are able to say that to us, synthetic media with malicious intent by bad actors to mislead, if it's harmful, it's a deepfake for us. The difference between putting something that's synthetic to creative use, we will always call it AI generated. So I think that's a different debate, but I'm glad that we are having this conversation here because, we've butted heads for a while now. What's the best way to go about this? So to your point in terms of, what we saw during the election cycle, I think you put it very well that thankfully the democracy wasn't derailed because of the deepfakes in India, and we are grateful for that. So the trends that we saw based on the data we analyzed, and the DAU launched on the 25th of March, and this was just ahead of the, a few weeks ahead of the first phase of polling in India, of course. Ever since, I'd say we've looked at upwards of 1,500 pieces of media, okay? And only a very small percentage, I'd say 5% of it had some element of AI in it, right? Which speaks to the fact that, these were people sending us audio and video from everywhere, right? So this speaks to the fact that, yes, the fear was a bit exaggerated, but we cannot afford to ignore it. So those were high-profile cases. Those were actors, those were politicians, those were business people who were targeted. And post the election cycle, I'm going to digress for just a second. Post the election cycle, what we've seen is that the business folks have been targeted via scams. So the trends essentially were that, people in public life, we did not see as many politicians, I'd say. It was a spectrum. It was not just politicians who were targeted. Even during the election cycle, we had a few cases of actresses. There were cases that were sent to the headline, right? Yeah. We had a few cases of actresses being targeted.
Mandana and others, yes.
Exactly, and this was the second time over, at least something that came to public notice that we noticed during the election cycle. So I'd say AI manipulation was a predominant theme. Deepfakes, again, predominant. So AI manipulation.
Could you explain deepfakes?
Yes. Give me just 1 second.
Sure.
So essentially, when you use the word deepfake as opposed to deepfake, it's again synthetic media, deep learning, machine generated. Typically, I'd say until this election, the word deepfake would essentially mean that less sophisticated technology has been used to produce a piece of content, and it would involve slicing or dicing, mislabeling content, so on and so forth. Now, what we noticed, and I'm saying this based on the case studies that we analyzed at the DAU, we also saw the use of AI in deepfakes, AI voice, synthetic audio. Mm-hmm. And you would see cases where the visual element would be so poorly done that anybody could say, oh, yes, it's not real, it's not legit. But the moment you listen to the audio, you would sit up and question, wow, this seems like it sounds like person X. So that is something that wasn't there before. That is something that we noticed during this election cycle, right? Then the other trend that we saw was AI manipulation. So we'd get all these videos whereby we'd see that the audio track was original, but the video track was synthetic. Okay. Now, in the video track, what typically we would notice were markers of regeneration around the mouth area. So the lips would be warped, the chin would look strange, and if you took a closer look at the manipulated video, you would notice these things by and by. And of course, the audio in most cases was completely synthetic, completely AI voice, and in some cases it wasn't 100%. It wasn't cloning. It was just an attempt to make it sound, because cloning is supposed to be a better attempt at making it sound exactly like that person. But in some cases, there were, maybe it was an 80-20. So that's another thing that we saw during this election cycle. And I think I'd just say that one thing that we learned was that the playbook remains the same. The old techniques that we've seen over the years, and I've been working in this space for a while, it has remained the same, but it's just that the technology is being
has advanced. Yes.
Yeah. So that's pretty much, what I would, and I know this is very brief, but
that's quite insightful. Thank you.
Exactly how we saw it. Thank you.
Thanks, Pamposh. This brings me to you, Kritika. Your team also been working on debunking deepfakes. So wanted to understand the scale at which we saw deepfakes during the Indian elections and how your team tackled it. Were there any specific cases, some tricky or wicked ones that were particularly interesting to your team?
Yes, thank you so much for your question. I think Pamposh has put it really well when she says that we really did anticipate a lot of deepfakes and AI-generated content. And I think, again, when you were explaining, it's very important for us to understand the difference between the two, because everything that's created using artificial intelligence is not a deepfake. We did see that politicians and political parties deployed artificial intelligence even for campaigning. So I think I just wanted to put that on the record that that's very important for us to understand the difference between the two. Coming back to the question about the magnitude or the volume of all the stories that we did at Logically Facts, only 4% of the stories that we did involved some kind of, use of artificial intelligence, whether that was audio cloning or it was video manipulation or audio manipulation. One tricky case that you asked me, I think one thing that comes to my mind is an audio clip of, we don't know whether it was her audio clip or not, but basically there was a clip that went viral, which was attributed to TDP chief Chandrababu Naidu's wife, Nara Bhuvaneshwari, in which she was using some caste slur. And TDP was, of course, very quick to put, sort of a clarification out and say that it's a deepfake. So with Pamposh's help and, we took DAU's help, and we were also in touch with other experts who told us that it was definitely not a deepfake, but now whether it could be attributed to her or not, that still remains a question. Of course, TDP is not going to come out and say that yes, it's her audio clip. For us to ascertain or establish that it was her, it's still a question mark. So I think that's a very big challenge that we are up against, and I think that's the reason why we really still have to be armed. I often say this, that the storm has not passed. The general elections are over, but till the time of peace, we don't have one nation, one elections. We have elections happening every 3 months, every 4 months in this country. So it's, I think, this election, the 2024 election, it was also a great exercise to collect a lot of voter data to understand how do you want to next target your audiences, how you want to send out those customized messages, how you want to reach out to your electorate better. There are several other cases, but I think I'll pause there and maybe we can come back to it.
Thank you, Kritika. Also wanted to understand if you faced capacity issues, especially when we are thinking about such misinformation in multiple languages.
Yes. So capacity issues, certainly, especially when you're talking about classifiers and you're talking about tools that can be used to detect manipulations, especially I'm talking about videos and I'm talking about audio. Most tools work well with English and to a large extent with Hindi as well. But other regional languages, that still remains a challenge. I'm not saying they do not offer you those services, but it's still a challenge when it comes to sort of relying on those tools. Anyway, you do not rely on any tool blindly and use it to say that it's a deepfake. It's always an indication, but that indication is also not great when it comes to regional languages. So that definitely continues to be a challenge. And I think all of us, journalists, fact checkers, everybody, all of us are working with people who are working on this technology to make it better. But I think that there is a lot of work that needs to happen in that area, so that we're able to create better tools that are able to understand languages. Because, I mean, of course, don't have to say it, but in India we have 22 official languages.
And then the dialects.
Exactly. So, yeah.
Thanks. Thanks a lot, Kritika. This brings me to two important points. One is the phenomena called the liar's dividend, where because there is so much of deep fakes, even if something true comes out, you can say that this is not true, it's also a deep fake, until there is a scientific validation thereof, where 100% certainty is always very difficult to achieve. There is this concern that emanates, which again erodes public trust. And second, as Kritika mentioned about use of AI for political campaigns as well, and our model code of conduct has not been very helpful there. We also had, during 2019 elections, the voluntary code of ethics drafted with technology companies and IMA and others coming together, but it hasn't yielded the fruit that was expected of it. We're seeing laws in other countries. There have been laws restricting robocalls on behalf of the politicians. I think that was also attempted in Delhi, but was stopped to some extent. And then we have laws. We very recently in September only got a legislation from California that restricts use of AI for political use 120 days before the elections and 60 days after the election. So that is some heavy stand being taken by states within the United States of America. But I must say there have been multiple legislations within US that we can definitely read and understand from and see how we want to potentially utilize those in India. Thanks, Kritika. And now I'd like to get on the legal side of things with you, Fawaz. So we have a gamut of laws. We have the new Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita, we have the IT Act, the ensuing rules, the advisories, a lot of, we have a rich legal matrix, but none of it directly addresses AI or deepfakes. But its interpretation does. So just wanted to hear from you and how you see the legal matrix working here.
Right. Thanks, Pranav. Thanks. It's a very interesting conversation that we're having. And, it does seem at the first instance that there's a lot to unpack. But, as Nihal said at the beginning, India is like the wild west of AI and deepfakes right now. That is so much true. It's so much more prominent when you realize how little of a part law is playing or regulation is playing in this conversation right now. Because you talked about the IT Act, you talked about the Nyaya Sanhita, the penal code. Essentially, what does it say? So, there are certain use cases of deepfakes that can be penalized under the IT Act. For instance, cheating, impersonation, we have 66C, 66C, D, E, F. You have cheating, impersonation, identity theft, transmitting obscene content. Those things you can criminalize if you find the case where offense is taking place. Similarly, under the penal code, you had criminal defamation, you have hate speech. Please don't ask me what the new provisions under the BNS are. Like most law students, I have yet to mug up with the same rigor that we had in criminal law 1. But despite the fact that the BNS was drafted and enacted last year, there is virtually nothing that specifically addresses AI harms or harms related to these technologies. Unless, again, if you come to trial, then maybe the new Sakshi Adhiniyam or Evidence Act would make it easier to enter certain kinds of AI products into evidence, which would be slightly harder earlier, but not impossible. So again, all you have is, if you catch hold of someone who is doing a crime through use of deepfakes, you can prosecute them in court. That's essentially what we have. If you move away from that, if you look at what real harms are happening, and if you look at actual content moderation and regulation, it's very thin. Because you talked about advisories. In March of this year, the ministry had come out with an advisory that ran into a lot of trouble because it said if you're using untested or unreliable AI models, you need to get prior approval. And there was furor because how do you say unreliable? How do you say what is untested? And in 15 days, the advisory was revised and it said you have to do appropriate labeling, and then that kind of died down. But if you set aside that one part of it, which again, what is appropriate labeling, we don't know. But essentially that advisory is also asking just two things. It's telling intermediaries to A, take care that AI systems are not used to violate IT rules. And specifically it said 3.1b of the intermediary guidelines, which is you can't use intermediaries to cause harm, you can't use intermediaries to post illegal or unlawful content or harmful content, etc. There's a whole list. So it's a due diligence. It's a due diligence requirement, and the advisory was just reiterating that you have to do this for AI as well. So it didn't introduce anything new. And then there was a further advisory that if there is AI generated content which can be used for misinformation, then it must be appropriately, it is advised to be appropriately labeled, is how it was phrased. Again, in terms of the signaling, it's fine, but in terms of actual enforcement, it's very thin, and more problematically, it's putting the entire onus on the subjective understanding of intermediaries, which puts us into a lot of choppy waters when it comes to censorship, free speech issues. How will they react to, for instance, legitimate use cases of deepfakes, use of deepfakes for satire, for instance, or use of deepfakes in a way that political parties are doing themselves for their own campaigning. So that lack of clarity has persisted since then. And you talked about the Election Commission's voluntary code of ethics. It did try to go a step further halfway through the election cycle. It gave a directive to political parties to say that you cannot use.
Which year was this?
This was this year, 6th May. There was a directive halfway through the cycle that political parties are using AI tools for misinformation. So it directed political parties to take down any such deepfake content within 3 hours if it was reported. But again, that is for political parties and their handlers. It doesn't do anything for proxies, for bad actors or anything like that. And if you look at, there's very little enforcement behind it. But even if you look at the direction of this regulation, essentially it's going in a direction where it's saying intermediaries have to take the responsibility, they have to do appropriate labeling, and they have to take down whenever there's a reporting. So that seems to be the regulatory framework which is emerging, and that again puts us, it raises more questions than it gives answers, because labeling, some jurisdictions like the EU have taken that route. They've said you have to do mandatory. AI Act in the EU is saying you have to do mandatory labeling. There's some exceptions for humor, satire, which again we feel those you want those exemptions, but they can also be easily misused. So it's also not a resolved area. But if labeling is the route we are going down, then that means much more clarity. You need to clarify whether creators, the EU is saying that creators have to label or AI companies have to label. The guidelines and the advisory in India are putting this responsibility on intermediaries. So that will have to be clarified. Where do we want creators to label it? And when does the responsibility shift? And in which cases do you have shared responsibility? That both the creator and the platform have to label it. So that sort of clarity we don't have. We began with discussing what is AI generated content. That is the first step actually before any regulation can be made. What will be labeled? What amount of synthetic material will we start calling AI generated? So these are, unfortunately, the legal scenario is we have a lot of questions. So there's little more I can give beyond that. But I will say the general tenor of the conversation, it seems to be shifting between alarmism and a lot of comfort. That okay, we went through election cycle, the skies didn't fall, it's okay, we can weather this. But I think, and that is maybe because of the alarmism, because it doesn't really help to draw out the scariest scenarios when it's actually going to be used in much smaller, much more undetectable ways. And if you take an even more macro approach, the deepfake and AI story is one part of the larger misinformation story. And in this election cycle, misinformation was alive, it was effective, and we literally saw it scale heights that we've never seen before. Yeah. So when you have that context, then a few videos coming out of dead politicians endorsing parties that are run by their legal heirs, that doesn't really raise any alarm. But it doesn't take away from the fact that much smaller, much more targeted uses of deepfakes continue to proliferate, continue to have an effect, and so the conversation does need to move towards regulation. It might be alarmist again to say that a California like ban, or as some jurisdictions are saying, you cannot use robocalls, you cannot use AI generated content for campaigning. It may seem alarmist, but even in the intel, while we are figuring things out, this protectionist approach might be a safer bet than sort of the free range stuff we have. But again, that is a personal opinion, and we are very, very far from it.
Thanks a lot for that. That was very helpful and quite detailed description on how the things are in India. We did have some dialogues on the Digital India Bill, which seem to be shelved, but let's hope whenever that comes in, we do have an open discussion on how we intend to regulate AI. And as you were also mentioning, a lot of parties were using AI for political campaigning. A lot of accounts, what we've also come across is a lot of phantom accounts being evolved, where they're just sharing regular memes for the time being, and when the election cycle comes, they are peddling deepfakes or misinformation simplistically, and or radicalized material as well. So in this context, Uttara, someone who has been helping institutions navigate regulatory environment, how do platforms like Snap prepare for challenges posed by misinformation and deepfakes, mostly AI-driven, and content moderation manipulation during election cycles?
Great questions, Anna. Thanks so much for it. There's two parts to the answer. The short answer in terms of tech solutions is that there is no silver bullet at the moment, right? And it's not helpful because the legal folks are also saying lots of questions, but also from a tech perspective in terms of what we can do in terms of deploying tech solutions. What we want is the following, right? There are many different approaches, but all of them come with some kind of trade-off, right? And from a product perspective, when we're thinking about just what the tech solutions might be, we're trying to balance a few different considerations, right? One of them really is computational feasibility. The second one is this going to have an impact on user rights, right, on privacy or censorship in terms of just, there being over correction or an inaccurate level of correction. And the last thing, of course, is, in terms of the tech itself not being very accurate, right? And let me just talk about the three types of solutions we've internally discussed at Snap globally as in response to all of the elections that are happening so far, right? The first, of course, is machine learning-based detection, and of course, I'm sure there are other experts in this room. But what we noted from that particular approach is that while it works really well in a controlled environment for audio as well as video content, right? In the wild or on actual social media, it actually isn't quite accurate enough. Right? Even in the controlled environment, by the way, the accuracy levels for audio specifically are about 90% is what our teams found. And even that's not good enough to scale out, right? Because then you have so many inaccurate moderation decisions made by the machine learning system that you have a censorship problem there, right? If you overcorrect. Beyond that, there's another approach that they refer to as authentication of, using the provenance information, right? So you look at the metadata to see who created this particular piece of content and what has been its life cycle, right? The metadata gives you that information. And over there as well, right, there's a significant amount of prone to error because what we would do there is we would mark it with a watermark, which has been the most acceptable solution by regulators. But the trade-off there is that watermarks are easy to do, right? And the third approach is hashing techniques, as a lot of you might know. Hashing techniques have seen some success in CSAM detection and moderation. But that does not quite work in the same level of accuracy when it comes to other types of audio or video content, right? So all of this to say that, from a tech perspective, all of these options don't seem to have any silver bullet effect on the problem, right? But beyond this as well, right? This is one part of it, it's about just the product-based responses in terms of moderation detection. But if you just zoom out for a second as well, there are other things you can do. For instance, I think that most people tend to think about social media as a monolith, right? And sort of tend to equalize between platforms that have extremely different designs and an extremely different value proposition or role in society, if you will, right? So for instance, platforms that are a type of town square, where things tend to go viral very quickly, can often be stronger vectors for the spread of misinformation generally, but also deepfakes, compared to, say, a Snapchat, which was designed really for one-to-one communication between people who already know each other, right? So I'm not saying we're perfect, we have different types of problems on the platform, but I think what has happened because of our design decision to limit virality and to only enable one-to-one communication is that we haven't quite become the destination of choice for politicians. So I don't think any of you will tell me about a prime minister video or a leader of opposition video that was on Snapchat. It's because it's simply not a good place for things to go viral, right? So there's that. Beyond that, of course, it's not true for all markets. Many markets have lots of popular participation from politicians. You have to have a package of solutions, if you will, right, as a company. And we've done a few different things. The first thing was the resuscitation of our elections integrity XFM team in the company. We were absolutely geared, right, just as everybody else in the ecosystem was, for a big year of elections, lots of different impacts, and we certainly wanted to be on the right side of that debate, if you will. So the resuscitation of that team resulted in a couple of different things. We launched a synthetic media policy, right? We revised our political ads moderation flow to ensure third-party independent fact-checking across many different jurisdictions using different third-party fact-checkers like Boom and Logically, for instance. And we also ensured that there was another level of human moderation for all of our political ad submissions. Again, in India context, unfortunately, I have no fun stories to offer because we've a very small player in the political ads and ecosystem. But even there, right, we sort of exercise more caution. We were able to lobby for a little bit more funds to ensure that we're doing all the right things to limit and moderate every type of political content on Snapchat. So I was there. I don't know if that was helpful.
Like that was quite helpful, and specifically your inputs on ads, because we see different kinds of regulation there as well. I think in the US they have something called the Honest Ads Act, where you have to declare and also limit political ads. So that's quite an interesting one. And your input on the design of the platform definitely does matter, because while one platform could be very useful in having the virality effect, another platform could be smaller but can be used to peddle CSAM. So every platform has its unique challenges and needs unique solutions, and you cannot have a one-size-fits-all approach towards regulating them, specifically when you're having talking about use of AI. So it needs to be tailored in that limited sense, of course. And I've been saving my opinion last because this would be, you've heard all the panelists, and I would want you to first, if you want to add to any of those, please do. But beyond that, you've spent a lot of years reporting on conflict and sensitive political environments. And from your perspective, I wanted to understand how can deepfake or AI-generated misinformation alter political discourse in a country like India? Because we've not seen a shift in our democracy, but we did see erosion of trust. So just like to hear your perspective on that.
So, it's quite interesting. As I was sitting and listening to everybody speak around the table, the one thing that kept coming back into my head was, I've heard a lot of this for the last several years. Every time there is a technology disruptor in the information landscape, the conversation comes back to how do we handle this disruption? Because is this disruption eroding trust? And I'm going to go back to like 2008 when Facebook became a thing in India, right? Suddenly everybody was on Facebook and people were putting out, this was pre-Cambridge Analytica as well, right? And people were putting out everything on Facebook. They were sharing their entire life with no sort of thought to privacy or personal data or political views or the possibility of somebody you don't know very well reacting to you. So in a sense, the conversation we're having today is not unlike the one we had from 2008, 2009. We still don't have a regulatory framework. We've been hearing the terminology of multi-stakeholder regulatory frameworks for tech ever since I can remember. I'm part of the Independent Advisory Council for the Global Internet Forum for Counterterrorism. And those conversations have been happening in a loop. You talked about hash sharing and things like that, which have become instrumental and useful tools in curtailing the spread. I look at it from the perspective of extremist content, but also of political misinformation. But given the fact that technological disruptors will keep coming, the Gutenberg press was responsible for spreading fake news and anti-Semitism in 16th or 17th century Europe, right? So this will keep happening. The one element that we need to focus on, I think you made the point that even machine learning works in a controlled environment, and that's because at the end of the day, you're dealing with how human beings are receiving this information. So machine learning will work up to a point, human content moderators will work up to a point, but I'm in a teaching environment. My focus is on literacy. Media literacy, digital literacy. How are you making people who have a smartphone from the age of 10 aware of what they're doing with that device? And I think that is going to be really the only effective tool to combat anything. Why is it that when we're talking about fake news and misinformation from the 2009 election, 2009, 14, 19, and now 24, the conversation on fake news and misinformation hasn't shifted. What you were making the point about alarmism versus what has shifted is the level of literacy. I'm going to go and hazard a guess and say that people are more aware that if you see Prabhakaran's daughter coming up on a video in the Tamil Nadu electoral landscape, you're going to look and say, oh, come on. And that, oh, come on, is coming from literacy. It's coming from the fact that fact checkers have been doing their job for the last 10 years. It's coming from the fact that school curricula are talking about digital literacy as, and workshopping 10-year-olds and 13-year-olds into this kind of conversation. That universities are looking at digital disinformation as academic courses and bringing that level of awareness in. Forget the legalities and the regulation and the tech solutions. I think we cannot underestimate the value of the human solution to this. And for me, that's important. The reason why, in spite of the spread of generated AI generated deepfakes in this current election, we're also kind of blurring definitions around here. Because to me, if something is synthetic, it is fake. It doesn't matter what that content is. It has been created artificially. So maybe I'm being too much of a, what's the word for it, a Luddite in this context. But to me, if it's something that you've created, which has been created through technology, through devices, deliberately, positively or negatively, it is fake. Now you have to determine whether that's benign or malign. That determination is a human one. So it comes from the generator and it comes from the consumer. Right? So I think the reason we did not see a negative impact of this on the electoral process, and we have election after election, and I for one hope we don't go to one nation, one poll, that we do see the use of technology and political parties using it. But if I see Prabhakaran's daughter, or if I see Karunanidhi, or if I cannot recognize an audio clip, I'm going to have the wisdom now to say that, if I don't really trust it 100%, I'm not going to go by. And that lack of trust is a result of many factors. It's a result of a general level of distrust in the mass media and the mainstream media, the empowerment of the citizen and the individual through social media platforms, the challenges that social media has presented to small communities at individual levels. I mean, so I'm rambling a bit and I'm going off topic, but I think what I come back to is that we cannot underestimate the human solution in looking at technological challenges, and we need to keep focusing on that as much as you guys focus on the tech elements. Journalists need to keep doing their job. Academia needs to keep doing its job. The classroom is a place where you're going to be able to inform people better. The media is a place where you need to reclaim that option to inform with credibility. And independent media houses are doing it. So if I'm seeing, if my students are consuming all their political news on their devices through their social media feeds, they now have the ability to say, I saw this on X, or I saw this on Instagram, but you know what, I'm going to go and check out this political party's website. I'm going to go and check out whether the Indian Express or the Times of India or the Hindu has also carried this story. And that's where the checks and balances are going to come.
Definitely. No, I've been reading, and there's been a shift on how we consume information.
Yeah.
We first see the comments or the ratings, then we see the bylines, the publication, and only then do we assess that is it credible.
And all that has come through literacy.
Literacy, yes, definitely.
All of it has come through literacy.
So literacy has definitely played a major role, and this is one of the reasons why, as you mentioned, deepfakes didn't take us by storm, because we are questioning what we see. And with this, I'd like to go back to everyone for a closing round of remarks, and first understand from you, ma'am, that what's the role of journalists here, and how can media work towards informing the public here? That's one. And secondly, how can different institutions work together? And when I'm talking about different institutions, I'm talking particularly about the government through meeting, the election commission, the fact checkers, and the tech companies. What collaboration do we need to, one, ensure that there is literacy, and second, ensure that when there is, say, fake news or misinformation of high scale, it can be taken down quickly?
So I think fake news on high scale is part of the tech solution. If somebody flags it, it's verified as fake. But I think coming back to the first part of your question, again, maybe I'm old school, but journalists were the original fact checkers. And journalists were meant to go through a filtration process so that extremist language, improper language, misleading language was checked at the editorial level. So when I speak about the media, or a lot of journalists speak about the media, what is it we talk about? We talk about going back to the values of good journalism. Journalism, yes, it's a business model for those who run it as business, but actually for the people who are out there on the field, it is about doing their job diligently and doing it to the best of their verifiable means that they have. I think there is a dissonance or a disconnect sometimes between fact-checking companies or fact-checkers and companies who work on tech solutions, because again, you all are also dependent on journalists. You're dependent on the media for helping you along that path of accuracy. Accuracy is not only what you're determining through software.
Yes.
Somebody has to go out into the field. So I think rather than, everybody's working in a silo right now. I think fact-checking companies and journalists are working in separate silos. And the solution is to bring them together. That's part of the solution, if you ask me.
Thank you, ma'am. That's quite insightful and helpful as well. And with this, I will come to you, Fawaz. Ma'am was mentioning about satire as well. Now, we have to understand that when AI is being used to create synthetic media, it can run down to multiple directions. There is genuine use of AI. For example, a politician using AI to present his or their ideas in different languages. Or the other extreme, creating a manipulated video of a former dead politician to endorse him.
Yeah.
Or somewhere in between where you're having the leaders from different states dancing together, which is just simplistic satire. Now, satire can go in either directions as well. So, what is this balance between free speech and effective AI regulation that we are seeing today, and where should we balance it? Where should we stop?
This is the age-old question, and I think I'll start with the fact that we usually talk about the Gutenberg press and technology disruptors. Information disruptors aren't anything new, and exactly that I think, because Gutenberg was what led to the development of libel under common law. If you look at the very first paper that talks about a right to privacy, way back in 1896, Brandeis is saying we have these new things called newspapers and telegrams and cameras, and this needs the creation of a new right to protect against violations which will happen in the future. That's how you get privacy, and now we have AI. So society, we will have to respond, and there will need to be regulation. Definitely, it seems watermarking, or whether it's to hashtag or watermarking, but some kind of labeling and identification does seem to be a given part of the emerging regulation.
Yeah.
Globally, that will have to happen. And at the tricky part, your question deals with the tricky part of where do we prohibit it? Where do we say this is somewhere you can't use AI generated content? And okay, it's okay for satire, it's okay for other kinds of creative means. I think principally, yes. Principally, it seems there have to be some exemptions, and in sensitive areas like elections, in sensitive areas like personality rights, for instance, is one area where the law is developing very quickly in India. You have Delhi High Court just a few months ago gave an order. There was a case of music rights. Sukhvinder Singh and T Series had a dispute. There have been cases. Anil Kapoor and Amitabh Bachchan have both got injunctions from the Delhi High Court to protect their personality rights. So entertainment law is one area where already you have people, the law developing to protect IP. In similar ways, it will have downstream effects on political speech as well. It will have downstream effect on what people can create online. That is yet to be seen, but ultimately the balance will have to be In the interim, there may be certain blanket prohibitions, like don't use it for elections, don't use it for certain sensitive areas. But ultimately, we can't say don't use this technology. We can't say blanket ban on this kind of content. The only thing we can say is make the information transparent, make it clear that this is AI generated, make it clear that this is manipulated media, and then as you say, let
have that
people call it. That seems to be, till now that seems to be what we are arriving at, but let's see, and maybe technology helps us develop a better solution, but for now it's very bad.
Thanks, Fawaz. We do have the content authenticity initiative. There are, I think, another coalition as well, C2PA.
C2PA.
Yes, so there are two coalitions that are working towards labeling, and like Fawaz said, I think there is more regulation coming in where there is very clear understanding that money is involved. MIT versus OpenAI is again another area where there's jurisprudence getting defined because IP needs to be protected. Now, if Rahat Fateh Ali Saab Khan is being used, his voice is being used to do gangster rap, there are morality issues as well. So these concerns will keep on emanating, and we'll get some jurisprudential clarity as we move forward. Uttara, this brings me to you because whenever you talk about deepfakes and misinformation debate, intermediaries are at the center of it, and because they are a medium through which this information is also disseminated. Want to understand, we definitely do not want the intermediaries to be the arbiter of truth and justice. But there is a point at which the responsibility to curtail it ends and the accountability starts. So what is the point where the platforms need to be held accountable? Where is that line falling? And secondly, what is the role of the government here in addressing this issue at a larger level?
Okay, that's a hard one. This question of where does accountability start is a good question. And I don't think that, frankly, globally anyone's bottomed out on what that answer should look like. Look, I'll say this, right? There is an inherently adversarial dynamic between the development of the technology, okay, and the ability of tech platforms to respond to it. And also the fact that all of this combined with the sheer volume of content on platforms makes this really difficult, right? So as soon as you improve your technology, there's an immediate evolution in the way that deepfakes move as well. So that there is that to take into account and center our discussions on. It's a reality, right? In terms of the closest we have to a collaborative global solution, and I do think that because this problem is global, the solution will also need to be global, right? We have the C2PA. And this is the Coalition for Content Provenance and Authenticity. And under the C2PA, there's a specific initiative called the Content Credentials Initiative, right? What they're trying to do really is create a CR label for every single piece of content, right? And generally speaking, the principles seem to work quite well, right? They're talking about universal, the conception anyway at this stage is universal adoption, ensuring interoperability across platforms, which is extremely important to have a nimble, collaborative solution to the problem, and also ensure that there is tracking of pieces of content across the value chain, right? I think from creation to its spreading across different platforms. Now, this can only work if it becomes universally adopted and there are more participants. That's a very critical part of it, right? And frankly, Snap is signatory to the C2PA and more platforms are coming in as well. I do think that that's the closest we've gotten so far to what a solution might look like. On the question of accountability, look, I don't know that I have a very coherent answer to give, simply because I think that at this point in time, it's unclear to me at this iteration of technology whether platforms, especially who are deployed, who are not necessarily creating the synthetic content but are becoming spreaders of it. From my perspective, there's an intermediary liability argument to make there. Of course, that's also becoming tenuous, especially in an era where it's becoming increasingly unclear whether the tech or the underlying algorithm or AI is making a decision independently, right? Because that's when you become, legally speaking, in my understanding, publisher, and then you take on more responsibility. My understanding is that we haven't bottomed out all these questions yet. I don't think I'm the foremost expert on this topic, but yeah, that was that.
No, that was quite helpful. Thanks, Uttara. Kritika, I'd like to come to you to understand that how does your fact-checking team stays ahead of the curve? Because, like Uttara said, the technology is always catching up, and it's circular argument, right? You have to catch up with the technology, and how do you manage to use these tools and AI-powered tools to understand the difference? And what has been your experience with these tools? What are the limitations, some of the limitations that you are seeing, and how do you also club it with human understanding, right? Because it's not just the technology that can decide. Maya also mentioned that it has to be a human in the loop to understand what the challenges are.
Yeah, I mean, I really do want to clarify that when we say fact-checking and when we talk about misinformation, we don't really rely only on technology. There's obviously a combination of human fact-checkers, human journalists that we're working with, and technology that we're using. So even when there is a deepfake, that's why I said that tools are an indicator, they're never authoritative. So we never rely on any classifier, any tool to say that this is definitely a deepfake. Or we never rely on any one tool to say that this is certainly misinformation. There's always some kind of verification that's happening at the human's end. So that's just, I mean, that's how in general fact-checking works. And I think I can sort of say for most of the fact-checkers in India, that's what we do. We work with our fact-checkers, they work as reporters, they they get in touch with stakeholders, people on the ground, law enforcement agencies. Having said that, I do feel that there is certainly a need for a greater collaboration, not just between media houses and fact-checkers, but also between other agencies, for instance, law enforcement agencies or government institutions. We do reach out to them a lot to get information verified. While I understand a lot of them have their handles mostly on X now, but it's honestly very, very difficult to get anything out of them and to put out information and verify. And also, I mean, I understand it's probably for a lot of people still exclusive information which they don't want to share with you. So you don't, you're not always able to verify that information through them either. Sorry, I digressed a little, but to your point about how do we stay ahead of the curve, it's very tough. Simple answer. You can't always. For that, yes, you rely on technology, yes, you rely on solutions, and that's where AI or that's where your technological solution comes into the picture. So at Logical Facts, for instance, there's something our team is working on which is called Accelerate, which is, I mean, in the simplest way, if I were to explain, it's like a search engine that will help you identify misinformation claims and narratives, and that will help you stay ahead of the curve so that you can identify and combat misinformation at speed and at scale. The research, fact-checking is going to happen at the human end, but the identification is what you rely on the technology for, because that is, for the lack of a better word right now, but that's sort of the kind of activities or the grunt work that you can use AI for. So I think I look at it as a combination of two things, using technology which will help you, which will complement the work you're doing, but I don't look at it as replacing human beings. So yeah, that's...
Thanks a lot, Kritika. That's quite helpful. And before I come to Pamposh, please keep your questions ready. We have a quick round of open Q&A as well. And Pamposh, I have two questions for you. First is understanding access to technology. How much of that is open source? And the costs involved, because I can assume there would be high costs involved, which is why it's not readily available to everyone. So want to understand that perspective, one. Secondly, also on synergy, because under the European Digital Services Act is something I've called the Trusted Flaggers Program, where fact checkers and some institutions can flag content to the government which needs to be removed. That we don't have something like that in India. So just wanted to understand from you in terms of synergy, like also Kritika mentioned, where do you see some of the challenges and what are the opportunities there?
Thank you for that question. Before I answer that, I want to respond to what Maya was saying, which is essentially that I fully agree that there is a need for media literacy. I think there is also an additional layer of AI literacy that we need to be looking at now. And I think we also need to consider the fact that we are a country of 1.4 billion.
Yes.
So, we cannot have a one-size-fits-all approach for everybody. So some people might be more privileged in terms of the access they have to some of that media literacy material. So I think that has been a huge challenge, and some of us have been on trainings with different folks in different parts of the country, and I think that is something we don't have any straightforward answers for. That's number one. Number two, and I say this with all humility and gratitude, we haven't had a bunch of deepfakes. That's also because deepfakes are expensive to make, okay? And audio or synthetic, deepfakes, voice clones, they are on a rise. We've seen a lot of that in India. And, in this small room, I'd like to warn everybody that it's only getting more sophisticated. So, we cannot sit back and relax. Even if the video element doesn't seem very daunting, but believe you me, the audio is getting more and more sophisticated. And like Kritika was pointing out, the tools can be limiting in some ways, especially when it comes to audio. Because of the way the tools are trained, they're definitely not trained on our regional languages. So use tools as a way, and we use tools, and I'll also try to answer what you were saying. We have access to tools. So by virtue of what the DAU does, we are a collaborative project. Okay, we work with organizations from different parts of the world, primarily India and the US. We have partnerships, and some partners have given us access to tools. Also because, the way we are set up, we are also able to give them access to our data. Because whatever we get, whatever data, whether it's audio or video content that's escalated to us, it lives on a tech stack, and whoever is partnering with us has access to that, right? So I think there has to be a collective way to, or a collective resolve to A, understand this problem, and B, I think there have to be some bargains in terms of, okay, we are trying to do this collaboratively. So what is the learning for party X? What is the learning for party Y? I think when we start looking at synergies from that perspective, because funding is often a challenge in this space.
All right.
Funding will, and I can say this from experience, that there'll always be people who are interested in what you're doing, but the moment you start asking for funding, they come with their own set of challenges. They may be interested in funding you, but the fact is that funding can be challenging.
Yes.
So I think when we approach projects like these, I think we have to make sense of it in terms of what are we able to offer to the larger ecosystem, and what, Kritika here is nodding her head, because I think she sees value in what we've been able to do collaboratively. The example that she earlier mentioned about, the politician from a particular party in Telangana, that is something we worked on together, and we escalated it to, experts who've been doing this for the longest time, and, get to your labs. I mean, without, there's no reason why I should be hiding names. So they are the experts in this space, and they were able to look at this, and we also consulted with some of our Indian experts, and everybody came back to us saying, well, we're not 100% sure.
Yeah, that is one important answer.
Yeah. But the good part was that we were at least able to put all the information out there, right? That, what the context is. And that was one case where we all collaboratively were able to do something about it. Even though it did not hit our tip line, even though it wasn't something that we were actively following. But to your point, I think synergies will come through if we are all trying to at least find some common ground to solve a particular problem.
Thanks, Pamposh. Thanks a lot. And before we conclude, we'll just take a quick round of questions, maybe just 2 of them, and we'll conclude accordingly. Yes? And we'll take both the questions together and then move forward.
Okay. Please introduce yourself, your name and affiliation.
Yes.
Okay, all right. I'm Sudhanshu Kumar. I'm a senior research fellow in JNU. I'm currently working on artificial intelligence in Russia. So I'm a computer science engineer by training as well. So I see that what kind of technologies are being used in Russia and Europe that to influence like whatever the people are doing. So according to my belief that why this AI, why this deepfake was added in this election, that there has not been any organizational capacity has been built till date by any of the political parties. But we can see in the future that some sort of organizational capacity will be built, and we may have like AI university like WhatsApp University in future. So this is a possibility, and in that respect, we can see cases like Cambridge Analytica in future. There is no organizational capacity. Everyone is learning that technology is still open source. And I play with the technology and I see that this is improving at a very fast pace. People will use it in future. And my the logic from my end came is that there should be institutional arrangements for human literacy. But I would I want to counter on that, because in this rate I think the most of the learning is coming from the peers. It's not going to be institutions. it's impossible that institutions will catch up with these things. I think most of the things that we learn about technology comes from our friends and peers, and that would be the most important thing. I would like to comment on that.
Sir?
Niranjan Chao from ORF. I'm trying to learn actually more about AI and other things. Fantastic session. Just a couple of things. I was actually during the elections, I was tracking one thing about the digital political advertisement because I work on political funding. So this is something where I actually am really caught up with challenges. One, there was a lot of news reporting about C-Result app, which the election commission said that there any hate speech or false advertisement, misinformation or thing by parties or candidates or even third parties are put up, that will be pulled out within 48 hours or something. Do we have actually any sort of so far has anybody really tracked that and seen number of those hundreds of complaint people raised through this app? The thing initially it was not working for a while, but it worked. What has been the sort of outcome so far? Whether because 2019 many of those complaints and other things didn't work actually, and they were not addressed. Whether any improvement in 2024? And second thing is about self-regulation. Like ethics, media code, and all that code of conduct, all that which was talked about a lot before the election of the thing. And we know at least with some of the journalists who have tracked the meta and other things that self-regulation has not really worked in some of the areas because when they experimentally sent a lot of misinformation, hate speech kind of advertisement, other thing, but it was all actually everything was shown up in the meta listing sites. So where do we actually really do to regulate? This is a landscape which is really growing, especially the digital political advertisement, and how to regulate that actually.
Thank you, sir. And we just want to take up these two questions. And first one being on organizational capacity. Would you like to take that?
Yeah, no, I think it was just a counter. It's a valid point. I take your point that everyone learns from their peers. But I think peer-to-peer networks also form part of the digital literacy umbrella because that's also a mechanism through which you spread your messaging beyond just your own network. So that's a valid point. I mean, I can't speak to institutional capacity beyond that because for institutional capacity, it depends on which institutions you mean, firstly. And secondly, who really is committed towards what those institutions are intended to do. So if it's state institutions, then I would have 20 questions for state institutions. Are they really committed to it? Is there a particular lens through which they look at it? If it's corporate institutions, then I think then the questions would be different. So I'm a votary of a multi-stakeholder approach. I'm just tired of the jargon about it. I think that's where I'm coming from because honestly, I've been working on this for 10 years and there is no regulatory framework. Multi-stakeholder or single stakeholder or, any stakeholder. Nothing.
Thank you, Manju. And as to your question, sir, I think you also mentioned about the C-Vigil app, right, of the Election Commission of India. I checked it out. It's very slow to begin with.
Yeah.
And the responses are, the action is taken months after the complaint is there. So the damage is done.
Mm-hmm.
That's the biggest problem with the C-Vigil app. And self-regulation has helped to some extent, but which is why we have IT rules and amendments thereof so that there can be a balance between self-regulation and regulation. But Uttara, would you actually take a stab at it?
Yeah, of course. I'll say this. I think in general in India we have a bit of a regulatory enforcement problem and an enforcement culture problem. Okay, so I'd say that look, self-regulation, I will be candid, yes, it's often used as a prevention of regulation mechanism by companies. They come together to sort of prevent worst case scenario overly prescriptive laws, right? But I go as far as to say that, frankly, sometimes regulation is not even as earnestly enforced as self-regulation. Okay, and you will be surprised at the number of absolute eyewash type institutions or some mechanisms that we put into place as because a lot of policy making has become about narrative, right? So there is a problem statement articulated, and there is an impetus to look like you've solved the problem, but nothing's really going on. So I'd say that the way, to your point on balanced product, it comes down to, at the end of the day, companies taking on more accountability and obligations. And also the laws, frankly, no one is going to not comply with laws, so that becomes then the default standard. Yeah.
Thank you.
Did I just add? Sorry, please.
No, please.
No, like on hate speech, actually, there seems to be some legal regulatory gap on hate speech also, because if you look at the current construction, even under the Nyaya Sanhita, it's essentially saying punishment for saying something that causes enmity between communities. It's to that effect. But if you look at more and more what online hate speech looks like, especially deepfakes, it plays on hateful stereotypes. It plays on, on tropes or on slurs and things like that, which it's in court, it would be very hard to prove that this was causing enmity, this was causing, so that in that way, the current construction of hate speech law also, that is, maybe that also needs to be looked at.
I mean, political advertisement has not been defined by Election Commission or digital political advertisement.
That's
undefined, actually.
Yes. Yeah, that's one. Kritika?
I just want to say about digital advertising. For instance, Meta. The ad library was set up with the intention of improving transparency. Anybody who's running an ad was supposed to say who is running the ad, who's paying for it, all of that. Unfortunately, there's no implementation, and I know I sound like a broken record. Basically, should be asking for transparency, but maybe consortiums as a solution. People coming together and asking for more transparency when, especially, there are policies in place. They're just I don't know if there is lack of will but there's no implementation.
There are those concerns, and I think there are multiple questions we would like to continue over tea, and would like to close.
I just want to say the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita might be the new code, but reasonable restrictions, there's still reasonable restrictions. They haven't been able to change them.
Definitely. So, conclude, I'd like to thank the panelists. We had very brilliant discussions. Only 4% deepfakes. Of all the challenges that were highlighted, there were concerns of capacity and collaboration and funding, and there have been some, but media literacy has been something that has helped us tackle the challenge of deepfakes during the elections, which is why our democracy did not get derailed. But there are solutions that have been deployed, like machine learning, content provenance, hashing. But there are larger efforts globally, like coalitions that are working towards labeling and like C2PA, CAI, that we should look out for and align with. And I think the solution long term is both in literacy and also nurturing synergy between law enforcement, government, fact checkers, journalists, and technology companies. And would like to congratulate all the panelists for taking all the time. Thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you.
And